I was invited to talk about the publish or perish trap, and especially about the meeting we had here recently, which was titled Science with Impact in an Era of Information Overload. Well, this presentation is not 100% geared toward the NAM community. I think the problem with either you publish or perish is so common in scientific environment that it's also relevant for the NAM community. As Kathrin already said, I'm Clemens Witwer. I work for the European Commission's Joint Research Center. Maybe a few words about what is the Joint Research Center, or JRC. We are an integral part of the European Commission, and opposed to the Commission, which is located in Brussels. We are not only located in Brussels. Okay, our headquarters is there, but we have also locations in Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Spain. I myself am calling in from Ispra, from Italy today, from the shores of the beautiful Lago Maggiore. What is our role? We are policy neutral. That is the most important aspect that we come with. We do not have a policy agenda of our own, but we give policy advice to the commissioners in Brussels. We have 50 large-scale research facilities, more than 100 online databases, almost 3,000 staff, and nearly 70% of them are scientific technical. 83 of our staff have PhDs. And we publish over 1,400 publications per year. We have 380 million budget annually, and we earn in third-party work, we earn an additional 60 million when we get on project consortia that are funded by other sources. The 380 million, they come from Brussels, so that's part of the EU research budget. When you hear about that on TV, the European Union spends so much on research, so that's part of it. We are completely independent of private, commercial, and national interests, which is a big bonus because obviously everyone has some hidden agenda with which he does his research, or hopefully not his research, but with which he or they serve certain interests. 30% of our activities are in policy preparation, meaning before the commissioners in Brussels come up with ideas, they hopefully ask us whether what they want to propose is a good idea. Per year, there are about 120 instances of support to EU policymakers annually. Of course, I said we are 3,000 people and we are constantly looking for people. So if you are interested in maybe sending us your CV or looking through the vacancy listings, use this QR code or use this URL at the bottom of this slide. And now let's again go back to our Slido, and I will start the next. So there will be a series of 3 questions now that should set the mood for my presentation here. So again, I will switch over to the Slido itself and start the next question. The next question is, when thinking about the last peer-reviewed publication you were involved in, how successful do you think it was in terms of reaching its target audience? I mean, obviously, we write our peer-reviewed publications not just for the drawer, but we hope that someone will read it. And how successful have you been there, do you think? That is a very interesting picture. And I must say, I expected something like that people who write papers are not 100% sure whether those who should read the paper are really reading it. Very interesting. And that is exactly what we tried to address in our workshop, which I will talk about in a minute. Multiple choice question. Let's start that. Which are the 3 preferred channels you normally use to disseminate the results of your research? You can click on three options here. So when you want to communicate about the great things you are doing, what do you use in order to make the public aware of it? So live talks and conferences is the clear winner here. Face-to-face communication is important in science, and your poll answers confirm that. I'm surprised about the low quota of social media, but yeah, that's interesting. Okay, what motivates you most to publish your research results? Why are you actually doing this? Why aren't you just doing your research and be happy about it? Sharing my findings, sharing knowledge is a very strong motivator for you to publish. Okay, thank you very much. Very, very interesting. So sharing knowledge, not really finding your target audience, is that a natural problem? Let's see. So the issue is obviously that the global scientific output indicated by the increased rate of papers published in scientific journals goes up, and up, hundreds of thousands of publications per year, while the uptake of the science in decision-making contexts, where the science should have its greatest impact, is not that impressive. So what we see is that there are an increase in an exponential number of publications out there, but the, let's say, evidence-basedness of decisions either in regulatory or in biomedical or scientific circles is not that overwhelming. So we thought here at the JSC, we need a workshop on that. When you don't know the solution, you organize a workshop. And the coordination group for this workshop, there were members from the European Commission, from us, the OECD, US EPA, Environment Canada, Humane Society, and a British company called Interchange. We invited people from all these organizations here, so societies, but also publication houses like Elsevier, Frontiers, societies like CTAC, SOT, American Chemical Society, and so on, but also government organizations, Health Canada, Swiss Center for Applied Human Toxicology, and so on. So these were about 40 people. So 40 people from these organizations accepted our invitation. And the premise was, firstly, the knowledge management is the essential link that connects science with its potential impact. So you have the knowledge on the one side, but you want the knowledge to be in some way or form used, applied, profited from. And so this knowledge, the knowledge management, in our opinion, is the main bridge between these two parties. There is a framework called the Adverse Outcome Pathway Framework. And if you are working in the NAMS or alternatives area, you will have already heard about that. And this AOP framework was proposed as one example of knowledge management that deliberately sets out to gather, synthesize, and organize knowledge about toxicology, in our case, in such a way as to make it more easily actionable by regulatory bodies and policymakers. So the AOP framework was used through the whole workshop as an example of how we could better communicate with our target audience. And secondly, we think that the professional life sciences societies and their affiliated journals play a pivotal role in enabling the forms of cooperation and collaboration that are required for a closer relationship to be forged between scientists and decision makers across disciplines, domains, and sectors. That's the reason why we invited so many representatives of scientific societies. Okay, what was the format? We had 3 afternoon sessions because, as you know, when you do something with across the Atlantic, then you have to do it in the European afternoon, like we do here now. People presented their bio sketches. It was very interesting to see 30-second pitches where people presented themselves and their main motivation to attend. We had a series of introductory talk. We always presented the AOP, the Adverse Outcome Pathway perspective, concerning that introductory talk. We had a huge lot of interactive, moderated breakout sessions. Slido polls, you might have already guessed that we are huge fans of Slido polls in the European Commission. And we are currently the coordination group, which you saw at the beginning of this presentation, the OECD and US EPA and so on. We are currently preparing a workshop report, and that is ongoing. And you will hopefully read more about this workshop in the coming weeks. All results shown in this presentation are preliminary and subject to finalization by the coordination team. I have a meeting with this coordination team next week, and I told them that I already spilled the beans to you guys, but there was no objection, because we are happy when people listen to what we think could be actionable ways forward. So, sneak preview. So we have this Science with Impact in an Era of Information Overload workshop, 7th to 9th June. And out of that, we had immediate action. So immediately during the workshop, we came up with ideas what we could do. The AOP knowledge, the Adverse Outcome Pathway knowledge, is stored in an application called the AOP Wiki. And we are now starting to, we immediately started to think about the fairness of this wiki. Is the wiki fair? Meaning, is the knowledge findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable? The fair principles, do they apply to the wiki? And to be honest, the first findings show no. So then we have a closer look at the AOP wiki data model. We have a closer look at how can we disseminate information much better about test methods, alternative test methods. I mean, we at the JSC, we're in the middle of the alternative methods validation business, and you would be surprised to know how hard it is to disseminate the knowledge about validated methods to those people who should use the method. So we are thinking about better ways to do that, and more from the participants. So if you today come up with ideas that should immediately be done to make science with impact in an era of information overload, we are very thankful for that. We also developed the ideas to organize a Pelston workshop. Pelston workshops are highly formal events, multi-day events, in which one topic is put in front of a series of highly qualified people. They are locked into a building and are not allowed to leave before the solution is found. Not quite so, but they organize these Pelston workshops, interestingly, very often and really in the middle of the nowhere, so that no people actually even in the evening have to think about the problem. So we have developed a few Pelston workshop ideas, and maybe 2022 will come up with one. And then we have 5 actions we think should be championed by someone from the workshop. One of them is nano-publications. We think nano-publications could be a possible way out of the publish or perish disaster. Nano-publications are tiny publications that are contain a single element of information or of knowledge that you think the public should know about. For example, the connection between a gene and a disease. That's a typical nano-publication. You encode that in a machine-readable way, and you publish that on a nano-publication platform. And we are currently trying to focus our attention, the people who worked in this workshop, to focus our attention of whether this is maybe an elegant way out of this huge, if you compare a normal publication, it's like a tanker, a container ship, while a nano publication is a little swift motorboat. So that's one thing. Then tagging of journal articles and the AOP Wiki, meaning that journal articles, and that's the reason why we invited journal editors from Elsevier and from Frontiers and so on. Wouldn't it be great if we could not only have a flow text, free text in the publications, but could tag certain elements in the publication so that it is machine readable and better findable. So that's a thing that we are currently exploring in the AOP Wiki, in the knowledge base for the Adverse Outcome Pathway paradigm, because we are also managing the wiki, and that's the reason why we are able to do that. And if that turns out to be a fruitful way forward, then maybe a similar paradigm can be experimented with in normal publications. Another thing is better communication between science and policy. That's something that's very close to our heart in the JSC. We are still not 100% sure that policymakers are listening to science advisors as much as they should. You see it, for example, a typical example. I'm from Austria. I'm an Austrian, and our politicians simply did not listen to the warnings from the scientists in September that we will be overwhelmed by a 4th wave of COVID. And so nothing happened. Politicians didn't do anything. And what we have now, since today, we have a complete lockdown again in Austria. And that's the reason why, and the discussion about politicians or policymakers not listening to science enough is a huge topic in my country at the present time. And I think you know the problem from other countries. Another thing is tracking science that led to decisions. So once science has had an impact on decisions, it's often forgotten. But we are sure that we should keep a record of when and how did science influence policy, and use that as positive or also negative examples in the future. But I think this track record of science policy advice is underestimated. And finally, engage more publishers. So that's a no-brainer. I mean, we had Elsevier, we had Frontiers, we had a few others, but I think this needs to be an overarching enterprise between all the publishing houses, between all the journals, and also think about other reward mechanisms in science. The current reward mechanism in science is the numbers of your publications, and you get estimation and reputation by the number of your publications, and that is, in our opinion, a dead-end road. And then maybe future actions which we cannot imagine right now, which would be triggered by other people. So we are currently identifying these champions for these 5 topics who will drive these initiatives forward. Obviously, there is a potential overlap between the immediate actions, the very, very quick actions, and these more long-term actions, and the a coordination group of the workshop will have loosely observed the progress of these yellow actions here. So that is more or less in a nutshell what came out of the workshop. If we drill down or zoom in a little bit, I think since these slides will be shared with you, I will not go into details here. We identified a series of current problems in the publications area, and we had first ideas of solutions. The same for cross-disciplinary work problem solution and science impact problem and solution. So this is more the theoretical part of this workshop, and then we came up with a series of actions. Pilot studies. So we will do a pilot of nano-publication. We will try more with the semantic tagging and the metadata. As I said before, why not have tags, machine-readable tags in publications? Explore the role of journals as curators of pruned knowledge graphs, so that the journals take a proactive role in pruning down the knowledge and not encouraging this wild growth of publishing, and link the AOP wiki with index journals, so that if someone publishes a paper, he should also publish the associated adverse outcome pathway automatically in the wiki. Actions training. So we would go for adopt an AOP for masters and PhD students, so that AOPs who are growing and growing in the AOP wiki get an adopted father or mother among the masters and PhD students, to immediately attract young scientists to this new world, and to communicate and to find a common language between toxicology and these different subdisciplines of biology. I think not having the same language, calling the same things different ways or different things the same way, is a huge problem in interdomain research. Innovative ideation. So what's here? Expanding what can be cited, including peer review, alternative modes of communication with policymakers, being much more persistent in getting into the ears of the policymakers. Not only because policymakers don't read journal articles, you will not find a politician who opens Nature. You will need to find other ways of communicating with them. And then the favorite acronym these days, FAIR, as I said before, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, should become a much more central paradigm in the publishing world. Removing barriers. We think we need to revise copyright laws to prevent republication of data. So much is not happening in the research publication because of fears of infringing others' property rights, and something needs to be done in that area. And again, connect policymakers and scientists, connect public stakeholders and scientists. So, and finally, workshops, finding more out about the usability of the AOP framework. Is the AOP framework actually the answer to this problem, to this publication problem? Yes or no? And we are, in a few days, we will publish a huge study about the usability of the framework. So stay tuned for that. Next steps. The immediate actions continue. The person workshop ideas are currently being defined. We identify the champions for the follow-up actions, and we will then instigate these follow-up actions. Just one more thing, as Inspector Colombo always said, there is a framework called Open Research Europe. That's very interesting. It enables researchers to publish any research they wish to share, open access without any fee, supporting reproducibility, transparency, and impact. It uses an open research publishing model, publishing within days of submission, followed by an open invited peer review, so people know who the peers are who review their papers. It includes citations, supporting data, enabling reanalysis, replication, and reuse, and more about that can be found here. That's a quite recent framework that the European Commission came up with to be one answer to this problem. Where should I publish my stuff open access? You all know that open access means for you, if you publish in a magazine and pay in a journal and publish open access, you easily pay €3,000-4,000 or dollars. And that is often the barrier between open access and not open access. And this is a framework that allows you to publish open. There is unfortunately one limitation. It's only available for Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe projects, but they are many. I mean, many projects receive Horizon 2020 or Horizon Europe funding, and in that moment they are immediately eligible to publish their stuff on or Open Research Europe. So it's maybe worth looking into that. Okay, these are my usual links to our organization, and that's what I wanted to share with you today.
So when submitting a manuscript for publication, and specifically if you were submitting a paper that used non-animal approaches, have you ever gotten a review that suggested that you add an animal experiment to your study in order to validate those non-animal based findings? So it looks like there are some people here at the workshop that this has happened to. And this is something that has been interesting to my colleagues and collaborators, and we've begun to explore this a little bit. My name is Kathrin Herrmann. I'm a medical research specialist at the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, which is an animal protection advocacy nonprofit focused on health research and testing based in Washington, D.C. in the U.S. Thank you to Drs. Herrmann and Hogberg for inviting me to speak about this work. Confronting Animal Reliance Bias in Publishing, which is a collaboration between my team at the Physicians Committee and Dr. Marcia Triumphal and her colleagues at Humane Society International. So publication of scientific findings is a necessary step in the dissemination and implementation of biomedical advances. And it also plays a central role in the progress of researchers' careers, hence the publish or perish dogma. It's a fundamental part of the research process that pushes innovation and generates policies and interventions that benefit society. But the publication of biomedical research has been greatly affected by practices such as a lack of transparency in the methods or how the results were gained, which also contributes to a lack of reproducibility between studies. And the topic of interest for this presentation, bias. According to the Catalog of Bias, which is a database created by the Center for Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford University, and which defines and lists examples of several different types of biases in health sciences, Publication bias happens when the likelihood of a study being published is affected by the findings of the study. So, for example, negative findings are less likely to be published or to be published in high impact journals. But what if the likelihood of a study being published is affected by the methods? Recently, early evidence of this, what we are thinking is a new type of bias, has emerged. Last year, Donald Ingber of the Weiss Institute published this paper, "Is it time for reviewer 3 to request human organ chip experiments instead of animal validation studies?" In the article, Ingber questions why animal data is still considered the gold standard for human health research, while presenting evidence that organ chips may better suit this purpose. This phenomenon defines this emerging type of publication bias, in which editorial policy or peer reviewers or editors request that animal data be provided to validate studies produced using human biology-based approaches such as organoids, organ chips, tissue chips, cell culture, etc. And sometimes this is done in a way that they need it as a condition for publication. So because it indicates a reliance on or a preference for animal-based methods where they may not be necessary or where non-animal-based methods may be suitable, we are calling this practice animal reliance bias. This bias may affect the review of grant applications as well, and it may occur in other arenas, but here we are only concerned with this bias in publishing. So specifically when editors or reviewers request or require evidence from animal-based experiments, particularly in cases where in vitro, non-animal, or alternative methods have been used. And this is a problem because it may lead to scientists performing animal experiments in haste and under the pressure of needing to get the paper published in a way that lacks rigor or even scientific justification. And it stands in the way of the uptake of more ethical and physiologically relevant human-based methods like tissue chips and organoids. So with HSI, we set out to gather evidence for the occurrence of this bias with the hopes of using this evidence to inform solutions and to urge publishers to take action. We sought to understand the experiences and perceptions of scientists and reviewers related to animal reliance bias in publishing via survey using the SurveyMonkey platform. We disseminated it using a link via research and technology networks on LinkedIn, through our own internal lists, allied group newsletters, and our own personal networks. And to avoid any confusion at the top of the survey, we defined the term animal-based experiment as an experiment performed in a living non-human animal or in a non-human animal-derived organ, tissue, or other biological product. And we define non-animal-based experiment as an experiment performed in a living human or in a human-derived organ, tissue, or other biological product, or in a non-animal specimen or in silico. As of August 10th, so these are preliminary findings, we received 87 responses with a 67% completion rate of the survey and an average time of 5 minutes and 12 seconds spent taking the survey. Respondents represented a broad range of biomedical and related fields. They were primarily from the academic sector, slightly skewed toward female, and from a broad range of countries, but most well represented by the United States. They were primarily research doctorates, followed by medical doctors, and they were fairly evenly distributed across levels of seniority based on years since graduation from the highest earned degree. Respondents had a broad range of number of peer-reviewed publications, but we did create a filter such that only respondents with one or more publications were allowed to answer the questions related to review. We then asked a few questions about the details of the kind of research respondents perform, including how often do you perform animal-based experiments? 30 respondents indicated that they never use animals in their research, but 26 responded that they do use animals at least rarely. We then asked, how often do you perform animal-based experiments for the sole purpose of anticipating reviewer requests for them? As in, you did not think the experiments were necessary outside the context of review. 46 respondents indicated that they never do this, but 20 respondents indicated that they do this rarely, sometimes, or often, which was surprising to us. And then the main event of our survey, the question went like this. During manuscript submission peer review, how many times have you been asked for animal experimental data to be added to a study that otherwise had no animal-based experiments? And then the respondents had to choose between 0 times, 1 to 5 times, 6 to 10 times, 11 to 20 times, greater than 20 times, or not applicable, for example, if respondents only submit manuscripts with animal-based experiments. 31 respondents indicated that they've never been asked for animal experimental data, but 30 indicated that this has happened to them at least once. So this is kind of like the Slido question that I presented you. And we know from this small sample of participants of the workshop that this has happened even to some of you. We then asked whether they thought the request for the addition of animal experimental data. Of those 30 people, only 3 indicated that they felt it was justified, while 13 indicated that it was sometimes justified, and 11 indicated that it was not justified. When asked to elaborate, here's what respondents said. It is not justified to ask a modeler and human experimenter to replicate their findings in an animal experiment because I have no lab to do this and present plausible model simulations that support my case. I would need to set up a collaboration to get these animal data, and that would take additional years. In the meantime, papers are not published and others cannot build upon the work. Sometimes the reviewers identify critical gaps in knowledge. These are valuable peer reviewers. Other times it seems like they ask for animals out of habit. We refuse. This is even more difficult and hard to deal with when it comes to grant reviews. The study was about heterogeneity of cancer cells from human tissue samples. It was irrelevant to do an experiment on mice. Referees ask for animal experiments because it is customary to do so in the fields of biophysics, toxicology, not because it's necessary. Many reviewers are unaware of the potential of in vitro, in silico methods and human-based models. In cancer research, some level of animal data is sometimes required. Merely requested to confirm in vitro data, no added value. We then asked individuals who serve as reviewers and who request that animal experimental data be added to studies that otherwise had no animal-based experiments, why they have done this. One respondent indicated that they did so because of a request from the editor. 6 respondents indicated that they did so because they have a preference for animal-based methods. And 7 respondents indicated that they did so because they were unaware of non-animal or alternative methods for the given hypothesis. There were several other questions in the survey that I don't have time to go over, but this work is preliminary and ongoing, and we're actually writing up the results of the survey, and we plan to publish it on bioRxiv in the coming weeks, so keep an eye out. But for now, we can tentatively conclude that this phenomenon of reviewers requesting animal data is real, and it presents a real problem in need of solutions. These requests may be the result of reviewer preference for animal-based methods or ignorance of non-animal methods, not because of scientific merit. And this indicates that a bias against non-animal methods on the part of reviewers occurs. It also means that follow-up experiments may be ethically or scientifically unjustified. We do acknowledge the pitfall that our sample size is small and our dissemination may have led to a biased and non-representative sample. So we're careful not to generalize the results of this survey. We're not trying to calculate the extent to which this happens in the biomedical field, but we're considering these results as purely qualitative and exploratory and as evidence that this bias exists. Our initial recommendations for addressing this bias are to broaden non-animal expertise on editorial boards and in reviewer pools to combat the preference and ignorant-based biases. We recommend to conduct anti-bias training with current editors and reviewers to elevate awareness of this issue and give them practical tools for fighting their biases. Establishing open peer review has the potential to solve many issues that plague the peer review process, including the bias we describe, by improving transparency and accountability. But ultimately, a major shift in the perception and uptake of non-animal methods will be required to address this. And that's where all of the great work and new approach methodologies that the researchers at this workshop do will make a difference. So thanks to my colleagues at PCRM and Janine and Christy, and at HSI, Marcia, Helder, and Troy, and of course to the survey participants, and thanks for tuning in.
So there was one question in the chat. Clemens already wrote an answer, but maybe we can still talk about it. And it was asked, what is the motivation for the publishers to engage in this? Maybe you can answer this live as well.
Yes, of course. It sounds strange because you would think that they are destroying their own business model if they engage in our project. But in fact, it's not that way. We were mildly surprised in the beginning of our when we started inviting people, but then also in the introductory remarks from the publishers that they are themselves deeply concerned by the flawedness of the process, and they know that we are on a dead-end road. For different reasons, maybe. They just want, publishers want their publications to have more impact, more visibility. But if they start drowning in the flood of the publications that we are currently confronted with, then the relative impact of an individual publication goes down and down and down. And that is to change this reward model from pure quantitative, how many publications does one can put under his belt, as opposed to the qualitative impact someone's research has on policy decisions, and we are very close to policy decisions. I know that many here are more in the biomedical field, in the research field, but here we are thinking about impact on policy making, and communicating with policymakers is simply not possible via peer-reviewed journals, and we need to find other and the publication houses themselves agree with us that we need to find alternative methods, better methods, parallel methods. Yeah. And that was very reassuring that they didn't chase us away and say, go away and don't disturb our business model. But they said, yes, let's do something together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good to hear, because sometimes one has the feeling that, you get so many emails by so-called predatory journals every day. Maybe we can inform the participants a little bit on that too, if you have some thoughts on that, Kathrin or Clemens. What to watch out for when you get all those emails about please publish with us, and I don't know if you can.
I would say that these days, I mean, and I'm not a big publisher, I'm not myself. I'm not in the science field. That I have maybe 10 publications with my name somewhere near the end, top of there, and even I receive hundreds of emails every day from people who say, you have, having seen your great research on this and that, please now, but I mean, we all know that this is not, half of them, click, and delete, that is to navigate in that universe of predatory journals and to find out the few good ones, and not delete the message from the good one, but only the 100 messages from the bad ones. That's a challenge in itself. And I think that is maybe also a concern of the serious publishers, that they might be flooded in this sea of rubbish that is out there.
Yeah, and just to add to that, it is really interesting, the predatory journals and sort of the role they play in animal research, and it's something that we've been interested in exploring. We haven't really dove in too deeply, but I think that terribly designed animal studies get published in predatory journals. And so they may play a role in kind of keeping bad animal research alive, and promoting it and sort of preventing, the sort of uptake of more innovative NAMs.
An issue that I feel, so I'm a chief editor of one journal, and one thing that I find, it's very difficult to get reviewers today. I mean, it's very hard. I know everybody's extremely busy, but it's, I send probably like 20 requests for reviewers, and most of the times they come back and say no. And in the end, you kind of get desperate, and then you get someone that might not be the best reviewer. And I feel that the quality, even if it's peer reviewed, even in this better journals, I think the quality has been going down slightly, and it's worries me, and it makes me almost like sad for being, my passion has been for science my whole life. And I really want to make sure that what I'm reading in journals, you have to be so careful today when you're reading publications. So how do you do to understand if the quality of a publication is good or not? Because of course you see what they're publishing, but you don't see what they don't publish. Is there a way that we could, request this for journals, for example, that you need to provide all kind of information, even like negative results, for example, because often you take them out because you're also pushed to publish, because that's what we get granted from, and that's how we get, and it's just, I feel that it has been going downhill the last years, but maybe hopefully you tell me that I'm wrong and that there's a lot of hopes in the field. So what do you think about quality and make sure that what we see today is really the best? Even if you go to Nature, I have issues sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting problem. I mean, so one of the things that we propose is like the open review model, but I've even seen some proposals for like quite out of the box models for review. Like maybe it's just this model of review that we've decided is the way to do it isn't sustainable, and maybe it's not the best way to do it. Maybe it's something like, publishing on bioRxiv or some other source of open access. And then it's sort of open to the public to review it. And it is, the public, the scientific community can decide kind of how does this hold up, and review it in that more open way. But yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I just recall that we had in our PhD course, we had a whole course on that, how to assess papers for their quality and how to find all the problems. And there were always problems, actually. That was quite interesting. There is another question in the chat for Kathrin. When you publish a human model with outperforming animal tests in parallel, so you can compare that, and you can show the reliability of your human model. What do you do if you don't have any reference data? How can you prove that? I mean, that's a very common question that I find quite interesting.
A lot of what we've seen, the sort of consequences of getting asked to sort of validate using animals, and these researchers don't think they need to, don't think it's justified, then they just have to submit to another journal, because it often is, those suggestions are provided as sort of a condition for publication. And unfortunately, researchers often have to go to, a journal with a lower impact factor. But I know that's not really the ideal answer.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting because even Don Ingwer, who is very well-known researcher, had issues with this. But I think we shouldn't give in, because why do we compare a new model that is human biology based with an animal model that was never, proven to be valid in the first place? I don't think this is the way forward, but this is what I have been seeing a lot, and I don't understand it. Obviously, I mean, all those organs on chips that come out now, and then they use other species, not human, to compare. I don't know if we are already sure that the animal models are not reliable. Why would we compare a new model that is human biology based to an animal model? That's my question. I don't know. Maybe Helena and Clemens want to add something to this.
I feel, especially when you go to the biomedical research, that when you have the patients, when you have human data, that would be, for me, that's the most, that we know already that the animals are not predicting, especially for disease, very rare the animals are predicting well the human situation. And when you have human patients, I mean, when we come to toxicology, of course, because that's where my field, it's very different, because there we don't always have the human data. But in biomedical research, I see this would be more, you have the patients, you have the human data. So why wouldn't you use that instead of an animal that, predict very rare? So yeah, I also find it strange. And I feel that the toxicology, my field, that I want to try to borrow from patients, especially, what Clemens talking about, the AOPs, for example, and really try to link it to human outcomes. It can also be, because you have an adverse outcome pathway, it can also be linked to disease, for example, often. And then you could, use really patient information.
There's another comment. Another problem is the overemphasis of human material used in a NAM, even so most of the experiment is done or set up with animal-derived material. Do you have any comments on that? Because that's a good point. I mean, we are still trying to replace some of the materials. Matrigel, for example, is still a big issue than even fetal calf serum. I mean, there is more done in this field to replace that, but I don't think we can replace everything yet. Any thoughts on that?
I think people are trying to move away from that. I mean, the problem being a scientist in the lab, you have a system that set up that has been working, and it's hard to go away to change your whole experimental settings, because it might change your results, even if it's, of course, what you preferable should do. But there's also not a lot of funding for that. And that's when we come to the funding part tomorrow. I think here is where some of the smaller grants that Kathrin's organizations and my organizations are giving out, for example, could be very useful, because, other grants is normally for, we can talk about that tomorrow, but I think that's, unfortunately, as I said, if something works, you don't change it, because then you have to kind of, and that's also sad in the science in that way, because you want to drive of getting better, right?
Yeah. They always say never change your running system, but maybe it's not running so well. I think another thing that's very important is the retrospective assessment of what we are actually doing, and be really critical about your own work, and just admit that maybe you have to change directions. So thank you very much, Kathrin and Clemens, for this insightful session.